Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this MaritzCX webcast. I'm Tom Evans, and thank you for your patience as we were waiting for others to get to join to get started. We want to get everybody as much opportunity as possible to join us from the top, so your understanding is much appreciated for that. Today's webinar is titled Elevating Your CX Program Through Mystery Shopping, and our presenters are Dan Hugge and Doug Smith from MaritzCX Virtual Customers Division. I'll introduce both Dan and Doug more formally in just a minute, but as always, some things to know before we get started. First, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the recording in a follow-up email. And that email should be in your inbox probably within the next 24 hours. If you missed that, just reach out to one of us on the program today, and we'll be happy to send it to you. Secondly, we have a Q&A session during once Dan and Doug are finished with their presentation. So you can submit your questions at any time during the presentation while they're talking, but just know that we'll be saving those questions that you do submit for the designated Q&A time. And of course, if you do have a question, just type it in the question box on your screen and then hit submit. Like I said, we'll do our best to get to all of those submissions before the program ends at the top of the hour. So let's meet today's presenters. First, we're going to have Dan Hugge, and Dan is Client Success Director with MaritzCX's Virtual Customers Division. He has significant experience in all facets of marketing and advertising, including defining strategy and comprehensive plans, establishing new business targets, creating compelling consumer engagement, and developing capabilities. He has a proven track record of producing effective solutions focused and revenue-enhancing results. And he has the ability to make those programs so they have the capacity to hit the ground running and inspire others. And Doug Smith is the Senior Research Manager for MaritzCX's Virtual Customer Division as well. He's been with Maritz since 2012 and works across all industries and business sectors. Doug is primarily responsible for helping design the mystery shop programs and evaluations, and then analyze and present those results to the clients and their stakeholders. So with those introductions, I'm going to let Dan take it from here. Dan?
Cool, thanks, Tom. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're located. And thank you for joining today's webinar. Excuse me. The goals of today's webinar are quite simple. Hopefully for you to walk away with some different perspectives on tools or approaches that can be used to improve your mystery shop program. And with that said, the agenda for today goes as follows, which Doug and I will tag team. First, we'll run through some quick housekeeping on MaritzCX and our mystery shopping experience. Then take a step back, maybe level set, and briefly talk about mystery shopping, what it is and why it matters. And last but not least, we'll tackle the reason why we're gathered here today, and that's to discuss the best practices along the mystery shopping continuum, hopefully providing a different lens from which to view mystery shopping. And at the end, as Tom mentioned, time permitting, we'll wrap up the session with some questions and answers. So let's get started. MaritzCX is part of a much larger corporation, and it's part of a collection of companies that fall underneath the Maritz umbrella. Some of the services and solutions that Maritz offers are sales effectiveness, customer loyalty, and employee engagement programs. That's through our Maritz Motivation Solutions groups, to Maritz Travel, which services and manages travel for our corporate clients, to our Maritz Global Event and Experience, which designs and delivers experiences and events for clients and their guests really on a global scale. But specifically for Doug and I, we're part of the MaritzCX group. At its core, MaritzCX is a technology-first company where our customer experience management platform hosts and manages very large CX programs with integrated services such as mystery shopping, supporting those programs primarily in the enterprise space. Specific to mystery shopping, we've been in this space for 35 plus years, and MaritzCX is a charter member of the Mystery Shopping Providers Associations, and we help to evolve the methodology with best practices in design and execution. On average, we perform over 500,000 shops annually, and we're partnered to a handful of Fortune top 50 companies. On this slide, this should give you a general sense of some of the applications that we provide and execute within the mystery shopping space. And this is the last slide that we'll talk about in this, excuse me, MaritzCX. And our experience in mystery shopping runs deep and wide. Excuse me. We work with a variety of companies across multiple verticals really with a heavy footprint in the financial, automotive, retail, and fuel space. So at this point, Doug is going to just do a quick level set on mystery shopping before we get into the best practices. Doug?
Right. Thanks, Dan. We realize that some of you came to this webinar with a mystery shop program already in place. Some of you came with no experience. Maybe some of you joined by mistake. I hope not. But regardless of why you're here, we hope you learned something about mystery shopping and how you can kind of take that to the next level. So what is mystery shopping for those of you that might not have all the experience? So mystery shopping is essentially it's an objective, unbiased way of gaining insights into what your customers are experiencing. It helps you basically understand the degree to which you are addressing the brand standards that you've created, the brand image that you want to put out there in the marketplace, whether it's regulatory laws or how your colors are displayed or anything that relates to how you want your brand to stand out. It's also a great measurement tool for employee behavior. It makes sure that you're looking at the customer service process, and that you identify, what are those elements that are really critical to delivering a strong customer experience, and then A, are they happening at each of my sites, and then that each of my sites is really important because B, you have to be consistent in terms of that CX delivery. So mystery shopping, the whole point is to just make sure that what you are standing for and what you have in place is working and is present. It's also just in general a good way of assessing the customer experience. So the mystery shopper is basically walking through the customer journey as if they were a true customer, and they're documenting and measuring things. What does performance look like on this or that? What's happening as it should be according to the brand guidelines? What's happening that shouldn't be? Maybe even what isn't happening that should be happening. So it's really a great way to take a sneak peek at reality at the front line, just a CX snapshot, if you will. And the last thing it really is, it's a measurement tool to help kind of create awareness about what's going on so that you can identify, those locations that are underperforming, those that are overperforming, or at least your high top performers. And from that, you can work in your rewards program, incentives program. So again, it's just a way to kind of gather all that information in one go. What it is not, contrary to popular belief, mystery shopping was not invented by George Orwell in 1984. It is not Big Brother. It is not a way to try and catch your employees doing something wrong, nor is it a vehicle for punishing your employees. It's not punitive in any stretch of the imagination. It's the exact opposite, actually, because the results and the insights that you get from mystery shopping are really used as tools to help train your frontline staff to make sure that they're delivering as they should. And it helps, like I said before, identify who those top performers are. It's also not a replacement for your Voice of the Customer program, and we're going to talk about this more in depth as we go along in the benchmarking section. But remember, VOC programs are feedback mechanisms. They help identify what's important, what the consumers think is important, and they help you build your brand standards. Mystery shopping, on the other hand, is used to monitor, to measure, and to report on whether those brand standards are actually happening, whether they're being met at your site. So it's a great complement to a VOC program, but it's not really a substitute at all. And finally, it's not a means of assessing internal processes or replacing internal audits. I mean, this is all about your customer. This is customer facing, what they're going through on their journey as they interact with you. So it's look outside of all that and just focus on the customer. So that's essentially what it is, what it isn't. I think Dan is going to kind of walk us through some best practices that apply to this.
Cool. Thanks, Doug. All right. So before we get into those best practices, let's just first establish a scenario. So for today's presentation, we're going to use a generic quick lube company as we walk through the mystery shop process. And really with any marketing or CX program, which you could argue mystery shop falls underneath both, once you've identified a pain point or a need for a project, one of the first activities, at least in my experience, is to define which target group or groups this project is intended for. So a common approach, which some of you might be familiar with, is to create personas for each of those target groups, identify the demographics, psychographics, what makes them tick, and really in the spirit of agile development is to list out and prioritize those use case scenarios for each of those personas. But for the purpose of today's discussion, we've created a blanket use case, and that is I'm interested in getting an oil change. So the slide that you're seeing here, that's just really a high-level view of just the mystery shop process itself. And so with that in mind, we're going to walk through this process of establishing the mystery shop program for an oil change company, highlighting those best practices and lessons learned along the way. While this, the process that you're seeing here might not necessarily be new, our hope is that you'll walk away with some fresh thinking or maybe some new ideas to consider. You'll notice there's a couple of dotted lines on this diagram. I guess the line going from the analyzed phase back to design indicates really tactical evaluation changes that tend to percolate to the top after running your reporting and analysis. And these really tend to be adding new questions or revising how questions are asked, maybe revisiting the weight or importance that are placed on questions. And then the second line that goes from the continuous improvement at the very end back to discover reflects much larger changes that are likely to disrupt the way in which the service is being provided and may require a complete reset on how the mystery shop itself is being conducted. Okay, so best practice number 1, principles and drivers. Here's a list of really common activities, I would say, that take place during the discovery phase of a mystery shop program, and you could really cross-pollinate many of these activities into other CX or marketing-related discovery sessions. From our perspective, first you want to make sure, obviously, all stakeholders have input and representation at the table. For this scenario, that might include somebody from marketing, maybe a UX or an innovation team member, sales or field representation, or somebody from brand, reputation, and compliance. Really, the goal is to have the stakeholder representation from any group impacted by the mystery shop program, or really the service that is being shopped. Next, defining the alignment between the program and the company's overall strategic initiatives. Then identifying measurable objectives, probably with a focus on CX. We're making the assumption that improving CX is one of the program goals here today for this company. Then establishing those KPIs, which may be a combination of some soft and hard ROI, which Doug will touch upon later. And then to round it out, if you have an existing program, obviously go ahead and audit that program. There might be, items that you can cherry pick that work well or salvage, or identify those that you want to move on from. And finally, check and see what the competition is doing. There's obviously a lot of good things you can learn from your competitors, and also see what, from a VOC standpoint or other consumer insights, see what your customers are thinking and feeling. And so for this scenario, really at the macro level for this company, the overall goal is for them to retain customers, convert them, obviously add lifetime value. Obviously, this is not necessarily a bold statement in and of itself and can be attributed to a lot of companies and organizations. However, I think the core question now becomes, what is the process for how we get there and how do we start? And in order to answer some of those questions, we must first identify really the principles of the brand and your customer, which you're seeing in those top 2 bubbles, if you will, as well as the drivers behind the mystery shop program and external factors. Going through this process, from our experience, is probably the most important component of the discovery phase, and certainly imperative for designing an informed and aligned evaluation, which we'll touch upon here shortly. So identifying these principles and drivers, really what it's going to do is provide an anchor for which your mystery shop program will be grounded. And one method to help really materialize this process is through journey mapping. And so we're going to build out these principles and drivers really into a journey map framework here. So going back to those principles and drivers, really what is the brand essence of your company? What are those guiding principles? Really what is the brand promise? In this case, it's innovation, speed, trust, and quality. Next, the program goals. Some of those might be brand compliance for this particular company. Obviously, if in financial services or other industries, you might have federal, state, local, or other regulations that you need to adhere to. But the other goals for this program are to improve the overall customer experience and really try and elevate the engagement of their loyalty program. The third section here is really the journey itself, and really every mystery shop program that you run, you're evaluating a customer journey. And so for an oil change, we've listed out the stages here from arrival all the way through post-service, and then underneath that, what are those key touch points that are pivotal between the brand and the consumer. and there might be other kind of smaller micro touch points, if you will, underneath those larger ones, which we'll get into. And then the last section is really what I call CX opportunities, and this is trying to expose, what at the end of the day, what really matters to the customers, and that's really going to play into the continuous improvement and driving some of those opportunities, and maybe finding new ways we can inject new touch points or maybe improve upon existing ones. So at this point, we have, a framework, if you will, of a journey map, and after identifying those principles and drivers, we have that architecture in place from which to build our evaluation. Doing this in a journey map format, from my experience, provides not only a great visual map to work from, but it also provides an easy way to provide that clarity when you're trying to build approval or consensus and acceptance inside your organization. So moving on to the second best practice, evaluation alignment. Here we've separated design activities really into two buckets. One for design activities related to the overall program design, and another for activities related to the evaluation design, which is where our focus will be on for the next few slides. So just quickly on the program design, that includes items such as defining business rules, the scenarios in play, the overall target volume, which markets are we wanting to shop. In addition, you would typically identify what, if any, product purchases are necessary, or there are quality assurance or program thresholds that we need to be made aware of. And finally, do we need to oppose any consequences, meaning reinforcement or punishment tactics, if you will, at the site, at the store owner or manager or frontline employee level. And so, as I mentioned, our focus for today is really on the design of the evaluation itself. We've listed a few best practices here where the first three, multifaceted, subjectivity, and experiential ratings, really talk to how questions should be asked, where the final bullet, structure based on touch points, really will help guide us as to why we're asking the question, which is really the pivotal piece here. So let's review each bullet individually. So quickly, if you're dealing with multifaceted questions, an example here is free of clutter, TV or radio available, temperature control appropriate for weather. Obviously, that's a pretty loaded question. And so our recommendation is to split this question out into three separate questions. So, both clutter and TV, radio, those would be okay to assess, but only if clutter is clearly defined and if there's a distinction on whether or not TV and or radio both need to be present in order to be compliant. And then that third component, temperature, we would likely remove this question, but maybe only keep if there were specific guidelines specifying settings on the thermostat, if you will. Subjectivity, I guess universally, really any and all subjective questions should be moved to the experiential rating section of the evaluation and should not be scored. Our goal, however, when we're designing questions is obviously to mitigate the risk of any subjectivity in those questions. So, if you take the word excessive, for example, and if it were used to define cleanliness, when crafting questions around cleanliness, instead of asking did the floor have excessive dirt, we would probably recommend giving shoppers guidance, maybe even using physical dimensions, outlining acceptable coverage of possible dirt, or using multiple photo examples of what should or should not be flagged as quote-unquote dirty. So for the example that you're seeing here in this slide, we would either remove this question or just simply rephrase it so the shopper can answer yes or no. And then the last one is experiential ratings. Many times our clients come to us with, let's say, 5-point scales, and our recommendation is to leverage an 11-point scale. And there's really three distinct advantages, which are to provide, that true midpoint for the consumer. It's going to ensure respondents recognize 0 as the lowest rating and don't get confused with 1 as being maybe good. And perhaps most important, any experiential or shopper experience metric scales now align and match those used for likelihood to recommend or NPS. So as I mentioned, the fourth practice here is really called structure based on touch points. And 3 previous slides focused on, again, how to better structure your questions, which is good and necessary, but most importantly, we need to know and want to know why. Why are we asking the question? What leads us back to the journey map. Aligning your questions to the brand or customer principles or those program goals will help ensure each and every question in your evaluation has intent and purpose. And so if a question does not align with one of those principles or drivers, that should give you pause or force you to ask yourself, why am I asking this question in the first place? And so on this slide, you'll notice the stages of getting an oil change, again, from arrival all the way through pro service. And underneath, taking the arrival stage, for example, we've broken that down into 4 key touch points that occur during this phase. So if you look at the greeting touch point, asking if you are welcomed and greeted is okay. It's obviously not ideal. I think a better way to ask that question are to make sure that it's aligned with the brand or customer principles or those program drivers. So stating specific requirements, in this case, within 10 seconds, really regardless of the genesis of this threshold and how it was driven, whether it was by brand standards or competitive intel or just overall past experience, we now specifically can map this question back to brand and customer principle of speed. And so you'll notice the remaining questions on the right, and there's some iconography that are associated with each of those. And so now we're able to align all the questions for our evaluation against the principles and drivers, such as trust, quality, or customer experience. And at this point, if you're looking on the slide, we now have a fully baked journey map. So that middle section now has been populated with our evaluation questions that are now mapped and aligned to the drivers and principles that you see above that are really anchoring this whole process. I would say, just going through the discovery and design process is obviously beneficial and worthwhile. And even if you stopped here, and let's say you did not move forward with the mystery shop program, at least now you've calibrated and confirmed the standards from which your brand will support this particular journey. However, in our scenario, obviously our company is ready to move forward. Their evaluation design is now set. It's ready to be programmed and ready to be executed. So far we've discussed, some of the tools and best practices as it relates to discovery and design of a mystery shop program using Journey Map as one of those key tools. But once you've executed the program and received your shop results, the question now is, what do you then do with that data? Doug is going to share a few of those examples, how benchmarking can help really connect the dots between soft and hard ROI, as well as positioning within the marketplace. Doug, all you.
Thank you, sir. So a lot of times our clients will come to us with a history of having a program, and they'll talk about their results. And what we're finding is they're looking at their results kind of in a vacuum. They're not really extrapolating it to the larger picture and gaining kind of deeper insights by looking at it alongside other streams of data. So there are 3 types of benchmarking data that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, there's a lot of types of benchmarking, but 3 in particular that I think work quite well with Mystery Shop. We kind of teased this initially, the voice of the customer. So essentially, this type of benchmarking really just gives you a knowledge about the consumer's expectations. What do they want from your brand? What do they want from your customer service? And then how do you think, or how do they think you are performing at delivering what they want? So really, it's kind of a bridge. It's an alignment between what your customers say they want from you, and also how that relates to the brand standards that you have in place today. Is there alignment, or do we need to change what those standards look like in order to meet those expectations of the consumer? The second one is industry competitive data. Essentially, very, very simply, it's where you stand in the marketplace relative to those that you are competing against. This can look across multiple brands, but also multiple industries. The interesting thing here is you really start to learn about some of the drivers behind consumer behavior, behind consumer thoughts. You're starting to learn, okay, why does a consumer rate one brand higher than another? Why am I down at the bottom of the pack of this ranking when a competitor that I would think is inferior is far higher on the list? It also gives us a chance to look at where our brand is simply performing or underperforming relative to those competitors. The third type is operational benchmarking or sales data. Here we're essentially just looking at the relationship and the patterns between mystery shop data and revenue or sales or some business outcome. When you get these types of results and you see a good connection, it really kind of helps establish and reinforce why you have the mystery shop program. Budget cuts happen, and you say, well, you need to justify why you have a mystery shop program. Well, when you look at the data, your mystery shop data next to operational data, a lot of times you'll be able to see this alignment and say, we have an impact on the bottom line. Here's how we do it. And if you don't believe me, hopefully you'll believe me at the end of this, because we're going to go through some examples that kind of show what that alignment looks like. We'll take a deep look at all three of these. So let's start with voice of the customer. Voice of the customer is interesting because it actually kind of influences mystery shop data in two different ways. And to kind of set the framework, let's go back to the life cycle that Dan had showed earlier on. So obviously at the beginning you have the discovery phase, the design phase. You're looking at your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, making sure that that what you are producing or what your brand image stands for aligns with company culture, aligns with what we're training our people on, and so all that kind of comes into play, and you have your mystery shop. You write the evaluation then, as again Dan had talked about, and you come out with some actionable questions, some actionable, measurable questions that, like Dan said before, have the standard almost inside the measurement itself, so that when the mystery shopper goes out, they are essentially taking an evaluation of truly that goal that you have in mind. So the first question there, CSR greets the customer within 30 seconds of arrival. So we know what's expected. We know how quickly that's expected to happen. That's a key driver for this particular company. So let's go further with this. The CSR greets customers within 30 seconds. You do the mystery shop, you get all your data back, and you find out that, okay, at the end, 88% of sites were compliant. So 88% of the time, the shoppers, as a proxy for a customer in this case, they were greeted within 30 seconds of arrival. All right, good. That's it's not out of this world, but it's pretty darn good. So you're feeling pretty good about your standard and how you're executing that standard, and then you kind of take the next look and you look at your VOC data. And what do you find in there? Well, VOC data says that consumers are saying that 30% of those are not feeling like they were greeted in a timely manner. So that, oh, geez, there's a disconnect. I thought I was doing well with this 30 seconds and 88% compliance. Now consumers are telling me 30% of them aren't happy with us. So that's kind of the first impact of VOC. It's again checking back and kind of giving feedback to whether or not your standards are high enough to meet their expectations, whether or not you are delivering on the customer experience that they expect. So then what happens? Well, it's kind of the other piece of where VOC falls in. It's kind of an influencer. That all goes back to the very beginning of the process, to the design process, to the SOPs. So you have in your mind, all right, 30% say that 30 seconds isn't good enough. So what do we need to do? Do we need to make it 20 seconds? So you decide as a group in that kind of design and discovery phase exactly what those new standards should be, and the process starts all over again. You evaluate it, you see how your compliance comes out, and most importantly, you see, okay, from the VOC perspective, do consumers, is it now 10% that feel that they weren't greeted in a timely manner? Okay, well, we're in a little bit better alignment there. So again, the mystery shop is able to look specifically at those goals and those directives and the exactly what the consumers want to see when they experience your brand, your product, your service. So that's how how VOC can influence a little bit. Now, competitive data. There are really three main reasons, I guess, for looking at competitive data. The first is that essentially it's the underpinning of any performance improvement that you might have. So anytime you're strategizing and trying to create some some improvement initiative, you obviously want to be benchmarking your behavior against those that are competing against you, against your competitors. So it kind of serves as a bit of a barometer as well to kind of gauge your success as you go along. So you put this plan in place, you make some changes, look at the competitive data. Okay, here's where I stand relative to my competitors. Let's make some more changes. Go back to the benchmarking data. Okay, well, I've increased a little bit. I'm a little bit closer to that top performer, so it must be doing something right. So it gives this sort of continuous monitoring of performance. The second way is about best practices. Really, who is at the top of your market? Who has that superior performance, and who has the best practices then that you want to be able to emulate? You're seeing that they are doing so well within the industry. Do you know their business plan, their business model? Can you take any of those best practices and make them your own? And it gives kind of hard and measurable numbers to how you're performing. So you can look at the results and say, okay, my satisfaction level is a 7.5. The top performer in my region is a 9.2. Well, okay, now you have a goal as to where you need to be. You have kind of a measurable plan where you can say, here's where I am, here's where I need to be in order to, again, remain competitive. And the mystery shop then goes back to measure, okay, are those standards that are related to those drivers that you need to have, that you need to improve upon, are they present? Are they being met? Are they being delivered to your consumer? And finally, the last one is it helps companies look outward. When you're so focused on results and competitive sales, and so many companies just tend to look inward. They think, okay, well, we're not performing well. Let's go back and look at the last 10 years of sales data that we have and see where we went wrong. And no, you need to look out your window at the guy across the street that's stealing your customers. It's the here and now that you need to be worried about, and competitive benchmarking, continuously monitoring that, will help you see where you are at any point in the game, and who's ahead, who's behind, and what kind of progress you're making. So that was quite a bit, and I apologize, but I do think it's very important to see kind of how this benchmarking tool can be helpful. So, in essence, it wants to measure, okay, is your bar high enough? Have you set the bar high enough to compete for consumers' attention against all the other brands that are out there? So here's just a couple examples of what that data might look like. This one's pretty standard. I'm sure you've seen something similar. It's satisfaction with the experience. And so in this particular case, you're basically told two things. One is a rating. So how am I doing? So say you're Nissan at 62%, and the percent is a top two box score in this case. It's the percent giving a 9 or a 10 to your brand on a 10-point scale. So it tells you your individual performance, your rating, but also shows you your ranking. On the left, obviously, where you fall. Here you fall kind of in the middle of the pack. And again, it just gives you an easy way to monitor that month after month, quarter after quarter, to see, is there fluctuation? Am I kind of moving up the chart a little bit in terms of brand preference to consumers? This next one is a little more, I won't say sophisticated, but a little more in-depth. This is actually pulled from our CX standards benchmarking data, and our marketing sciences department has a proprietary analysis called True Driver Analysis that they use to look at certain factors and try to predict other factors. So in this case, in the competitive benchmarking data, we're looking at predicting likelihood to recommend. And so the first thing that happens is you have consumers, rate how they feel about your brand on specific elements, so friendliness of staff, availability, cleanliness, things like that. And then we're able to take that rating and then look at their likelihood to recommend rating and say, okay, which of these factors is the bigger driver of likelihood to recommend? So if I had to pull a certain lever, which of these levers would I pull to get the biggest bang for my buck to make them recommend our particular brand? So in this case, let's start with the green bar here. Essentially, this is your brand, the green bar, and you see, okay, 19.7%, so 20% of my brand's customers are likely to recommend the brand based on how well they were treated by the staff based on that friendliness. 14% speed and efficiency. So, and actually, if you look down the left, you think, oh my gosh, 3 of the 6 are customer service, and the top 3 are all customer service. Well, man, we better pour some money into some additional training and make sure that these employees are delivering, because that is what is going to help drive our likelihood to be recommended by our consumers. And the other interesting thing here is, we can do it for any brand. So your key competitor, that second bar. So you start to see, well, okay, that friendliness of staff, I'm at about 20%. My key competitor is about 17%. Well, that's kind of interesting. Friendliness doesn't necessarily mean as much to my competitors' consumers in terms of recommending the brand as it does to me. And then you can look at the industry as a whole, that third bar, and that first example, you're about on par with the rest of the industry in terms of how important friendliness of staff is. So again, the whole point is that once you know some of these drivers and these factors, that obviously has to go back into your mind in your discovery session to say, okay, what are our standards around these particular drivers? Is it enough to get customers to come and to come back? And then again, the mystery shop portion comes in where you start evaluating whether or not those elements that create those drivers are actually present. So it all kind of ties in together. The other industry and competitive one, I'm sorry, operational and sales data actually is the third one that I meant. So this one really looks at, again, combining sales information with the mystery shop data. In this particular case, it was used by the client to educate their front line on their behaviors and making sure that they knew, what you do when you come into work matters, because you have an influence, believe it or not, on the revenue that we generate. And so they selected a number of key customer experience drivers, again, to make sure that when the mystery shop comes through, those are the biggies that are assessed. And they said, okay, well, how does performance on these particular drivers relate to our sales revenue? What they found in this particular case was very interesting. So again, this shows the number of gallons sold in a particular month. This is one of our retail petroleum clients, and the number of those CX drivers that were missed. So if you look at the very top row, these sites you're doing phenomenally. 0 miss. They were firing on all cylinders, delivering everything they could for that customer experience based to the standards that you had in place, and they were selling 110,000 gallons per month. Well, there were sites out there that they didn't quite make that super cut. They missed one here or there, but for the most part they were all right. Well, they were selling about 95,000, so they had a 15,000 gallon drop in volume. Well, make your way down then to lower and lower and lower down that chart, and you get to 5 plus. And oh my goodness, you missed 5 or more of those drivers. You're at 56,000 gallons. That's half of what those sites at the very top were selling. When they were, again, we're firing on all cylinders. We're delivering that CX that the consumer wanted. So, here again, it makes sense to say, why do we need to be so careful that we are always complying with our standards, and those standards are delivering the customer experience that our consumers want based on their voice of the customer feedback and the competitive feedback and all that other type of benchmarking. And this was actually so impactful that they took this chart and they implemented it onto their dashboard, so that when any of their employees logged in to their website, they were essentially forced to see this chart and to monitor it and to remind them that what they do matters, that there is a direct kind of correlation between CX drivers and adherence to those drivers and the bottom line. So two quick other examples, both linkage examples. This one's pretty straightforward as well. This was kind of really cool. This was looking at, again, volume on the left and mystery shop scores on the right, or I'm sorry, on the bottom. And as you can see, as your score increases, as you move further to the right, you go up in terms of the amount of volume sold. And what we actually found was that for every 10% improvement in score, there was 110,000 additional volume sold. So if I was at a 65% and I worked really hard to clean up my act and clean up my restrooms and my floors, and I became much more compliant, and I was now at a 75% this next time, there's a likelihood that could have generated an additional 110,000. And why is that the case? Well, you're more compliant. You are delivering a better experience to your customers. They might be more likely now to come back, and all those little things just kind of build and build until you start to see that revenue change based on compliance and based on the mystery shop scores themselves. And the last study, another linkage analysis, again with our retail petroleum client. Different client this time, but this client came to us and said, is there a threshold where our sites, our distributors are just performing so much better than everybody else? And through this analysis, again, at looking at their scores and the volume sold, we found that threshold was actually 95%. And so those distributors that scored 95% are there in the green, and those that scored under 95% are in the gray. And we looked at this. In this case, it was for 2015 and 2016. We essentially had kind of the same phenomenon. So what did we see? We saw that if you scored 95% or higher, in general, you were selling 53% more gallons than those that scored below 95%. I mean, that's crazy. It really kind of, again, reinforces why you want to have that higher mystery shop score, which means you have that higher CX standard, which means you're delivering more, you're delivering better, delivering more consistently to your consumers. Get above that threshold, and you will see a huge bump potentially in that revenue. And the other kind of cool thing about this particular analysis is it really helps to highlight, okay, who are my true top performers? We've got X number of distributors that fall into this green bar. We need to recognize them. We need to formally recognize and reward them, and then we need to incentivize those in the gray to make sure that this happens. Get your act together and become more compliant, and you will see larger growth. And so the link here, again, between mystery shop and sales data is not just one where you can track performance, but you can identify, okay, where do I need to reward? Where do I need to incentivize? Where do I need to maybe put some more emphasis on training for those that just aren't getting to that lower threshold? It really just kind of helps you raise the bar and know kind of where and when to raise the bar through recognizing and rewarding these sites. And I talk about recognizing and rewarding. Up until now, we've really only talked about kind of the programmatic side of mystery shopping, the mechanics, the processes. We tend to overlook kind of the other element that's just as important in my mind. It's the behavioral element, the people component. What good are creating, measuring brand standards if you don't have anybody to enforce them? So what we need to spend our time with more often than we do currently is thinking about the customer, or thinking about our employees, and kind of what drives their behavior. What gets them to get off their chairs and actually go pick up the trash that's outside. What would motivate them to take action? Because taking action means that they're becoming, presumably, doing things that make them more compliant. You become more compliant, as we said, it drives delivery of CX. CX drives loyal customers, repeat business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to understand our people better before we can expect to have that happen. So Dan's actually going to kind of close us out today by exploring a little bit more about that humanistic side of mystery shopping. Dan?
Cool. Thanks, Doug. Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, doing the mystery shop process and kind of what we went over today is all fine. But really what we're working towards is that continuous improvement, right, of whether it's the mystery shop program, but at a higher view, the overall CX program that you're running, and how can we better the customer experience, right? That's really what we're striving for. And so that's where, if you look back to the journey map, that bottom section called CX opportunities, that's really where you start to explore, some of those new touch points or improvements on touch points, and what can we do to continually move the needle and up the game, if you will. So, at Maritz here, we have an opportunity to partner with our behavioral science and innovation team, where they support all the companies within the Maritz ecosystem. They do so by creating, programs and solutions that really help drive the behavior of our client stakeholders. And so to finish out today's chat, we're going to walk through just a few behavioral science principles and see how they might apply to our Quick Lube company. And so this is the first of 4 that I'm going to share with you. This is the peek-in rule. And so if you're looking at the description, really what that's saying is that, people's memory or how they view their experience is based on, what was maybe the peak of that experience, or, good or bad, and really how it ended in their memory. And so if you think about fireworks at the end of the day when you're visiting Disney World, right? That's pretty memorable and impactful experience to end on. Or I was telling Doug the other day, unbeknownst to me, my wife and I were using this strategy and continue to do so with our kids for Christmas. So we'll make sure that they might open a relatively quote-unquote decent present in the middle of opening their gifts, and then we'll save kind of the quote-unquote wow gift at the end. So just hopefully ensuring that they're happy for the rest of the day. But going back to the Quick Lube connection, how this might apply, what if technicians, when they bring your car around, left a note or a piece of candy or maybe a branded item like an air gauge in your car after getting your oil changed? And so think back to those personas. You can kind of carve out those experiences for different personas. So a note, maybe that would resonate better with, say, baby boomers. Candy might be better for the soccer mom who might have kids with them. They might actually not mind going to get the oil changed. Or a branded item. Maybe that's a car enthusiast that will get geeked out by something like that. So that's one way, or a few ways, how you might be able to apply this principle. The next one is social proof. So the description here is really we tend to follow patterns of the majority or those that are similar to us, right? We don't want to stand out, basically. And so, if you think about if you have any fitness apps that you use on a daily basis, like Strava or Map My Run, you can constantly view your friends' workouts, badges, the community groups and forums. These apps are just saturated with shared content metrics within your community. So you're constantly seeing what others are doing. But specifically this scenario, you can start out by simply exposing, certain KPIs on a reporting portal within your network. That way, certain, sites or dealers or franchisees can see how other sites are doing, how the other network franchisees are doing, and really, or geos or areas that are specific to you to see how you're performing, relative to the rest of them. The next one is progress feedback. Description here, this is pretty straightforward. Obviously, when you have a goal or target in mind, providing that regular feedback often. And so, the one way I kind of internalize this is it kind of makes me think of the popularity and the rise of agile versus waterfall when you're talking about development. So if you're thinking about agile, it's based on frequent touch points, every morning, what you do yesterday, what are you doing, the issues, what are you doing tomorrow kind of thing. There's constant feedback loops, constant resetting of priorities to get your next code released correct and on a timely fashion. And so for, the quick loop connection, maybe that is just simply exposing, the progress on any quality assurance goals you might have, or KPI metrics, or just overall shop performance. If you're working towards a certain goal, giving those notifications and alerts to let them know how they're doing, maybe ideas on how they can get to the goal that they're trying to get to. So it's really just those frequent touch points, that as you're working towards those goals. And then the last one is labor illusion or operational transparency. So that's really creating the environment and making your consumers and customers aware of kind of where they're at and where that service is along that continuum, so they're kind of not in the dark, if you will. So if you think of, the DMV or haircut, you go in now, you're able to see that digital board, and you can tell kind of I'm 30 minutes out from getting service, 10 minutes out. You're able to quickly understand kind of where you're at in the queue, so to speak. You could think of Amazon or Zappos, but probably the best example might be the Domino's Pizza Tracker, right? I mean, that's labor illusion to a T, if you will. And so the connection here with ClickLube, again, might be when you go in there, and I know for me personally, I would love to drop my car off and go literally run or go do an errand. And if I can get text notifications, or if I'm sitting there with my kids in the room, having a digital board so I can have a clue of kind of how much further is there to go, right? It's kind of like waiting tables. If you have a waitress or a waiter that takes your order but never comes back, you're constantly wondering. If you have somebody that comes back and says, hey, food's up in 10 minutes or 5 minutes, it's constantly kind of letting you know that wait time doesn't seem as bad, even though it could be for the same duration. And so just a couple examples of how behavioral science can really lend itself to that continuous improvement and up the kind of the CX and mystery shop game. And really, so I guess to wrap it up, the 4 areas that we really touched on today, hopefully you found useful and beneficial. We shared how journey mapping might be used as a tool to help guide your mystery shop program, discussed, some of the importance of aligning your principals and drivers to those specific evaluation questions. Doug ran us through 3 benchmarking activities that will hopefully provide better insights and analysis to your mystery shop data. And then I just finished up introducing, just some of the behavioral science principles, which there are many more of, as a possible avenue to drive that behavior change and hope, again, to continuously improve that CX program. And so with that, Tom, I think Doug and I are finished. So if we want to open it up for any Q&A, we're good.
All right, great. Yeah, we have a little bit of time for Q&A, so thank you so much, Dan and Doug, for that. We've seen growing interest among our clients in trying to understand how mystery shopping can bolster those programs. So thanks to both of you for helping kind of shed some light on that and how to make that a reality. So we do have some questions that came in, and we're going to start with this one. Should our quality assurance employees be our mystery shoppers, or who do you recommend does this task?
I can start out, Dan, if you want.
Sure.
Sure. I would not recommend that the QA employees be your mystery shoppers. I don't think anybody from the organization should be a mystery shopper. There's a lot of reasons. First and foremost, you want these results to be unbiased, a neutral, unbiased third party that they don't have their. They're not thinking about these things that they're evaluating day in and day out. It needs to be somebody that's removed from it, and it needs to be a customer. I mean, this is what we're looking at is the customer journey. And sure, your QA employees are customers in their own right, but this needs to be somebody, again, outside of any kind of organization that might be doing the mystery shop, to go in with fresh eyes, with expectations that may or may not be met. I'm afraid that the QA employees might get distracted easily by other things that maybe they're not supposed to be measuring, but they see, oh, that's not right. Boy, we should kind of fix that next time. You just need to make sure that it's completely objective. In terms of who should, again, I don't think it's anybody within the organization. I think it truly needs to be a neutral third party. Now, it can be a customer of yours. It doesn't have to be a random mystery shopper. It can be a customer of yours that would have these standards that they would go in with if you needed that kind of connection to your brand. But that's certainly something that we could talk about more later.
And Doug, I think it was you talking about how you what mystery shopping isn't. I think earlier in the presentation. This person had a question about how can you change that perception that it is not like a big brother, but rather an improvement tool. So both when launching the program, but also in the process of reviewing the results.
Well, I think kind of the same answer applies in some way. Having that neutral, objective person that really has absolutely no connection to your brand, that helps. because they're not going to benefit from whether you're right or wrong on something, whether you're compliant or not compliant. They have absolutely no stake in the game, and so I think that's certainly one way. And I also think the other way is having that buy-in across the organization initially. So making sure that all those stakeholders have a seat at the table, talk about what's important to them, talk about what standards should look like. That this is not just kind of one person looming in the air, kind of watching over everybody and dictating what should be or what should not be. I mean, this is everybody as an organization agreeing to what they stand for, agreeing to what their brand image is. So I think rallying the troops, if you will, together and seeing this sort of combined effort and combined mentality will sort of kind of dissipate the notion of Big Brother, I would think.
And Doug, I would just say, to your point, making sure they understand the purpose and intent of the program. I would also, oftentimes our clients will use this as a training opportunity, right? And they'll use the results on whatever that cadence might be, bi-monthly or monthly or quarterly, to sit down with the frontline employees and go through results and explain, here's maybe we're doing well, here's some areas of concern that we need to improve upon or focus on. Obviously not calling out names, that would obviously be a deterrent. But one of our clients, they do that where they have monthly meetings and they go through the results. The only time they do call out names is if somebody was listed on a mystery shop, the frontline employee's name was listed and they scored maybe 100% on that mystery shop, and they might be awarded with a $100 bill in front of everybody, again, to show that positive reinforcement. So I think just creating that environment or culture that this is the purpose here is for training and to make yourself a better version of yourself today is really kind of the theme. So.
Okay.
Excellent point, Dan.
Are there a certain number of shops you recommend to customers when designing their mystery shop program?
I think it's probably more the question of what's the cadence, right? So we have some that maybe just want to do it for a short period of time, but I think as you could see that, I think when Doug was talking, especially the VOC data, it's really a cyclical process, and it's a continuous improvement process, if you will. So I think the more important question is, is there a duration? And I think, continually doing that would be the answer. But in terms of volume, I think there's a lot of other factors that would weigh into that. If you're specifically talking about, maybe I want to test the waters, I haven't done this before, I'm going to do a pilot, I think then you could maybe run some, statistical analysis of, what's the size of your network, and, if we want to have 95% confidence level, we're going to need, X amount of shops to give us some good data and validity to move forward with.
Exactly. It all, from a statistical perspective, it all does come back to, representation. How many shops do you need to make sure that the results you get are truly representative of your entire network, your entire population, and then precision. How many shops do you need to make sure that the results you get are as close to the quote unquote truth as possible. That's your confidence level, your confidence interval, and yeah. So that again, looking at the broader picture and how you want to be able to extrapolate this data and how carefully you want to say, okay, this is actually what's happening, that will determine a lot of about the number of shops.
Okay, great. We are actually at the top of the hour, so we're going to put a wrap on today's webcast. I wanted to thank Dan and Doug for joining us and presenting today. Great job on the presentation, and of course, thanks to our producer, Daniel Johansson, for another great webinar. If you want to know more about mystery shopping for your organization, just reach out to Dan or Doug, and I'm sure they're going to be more than happy to explain in detail the best options for your organization. So until our next webinar, have a great remainder of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody.